So please excuse my bad breath. I know that I had garlic earlier, so that explains that. And now that you've sat through that loading screen, it's time to... Hold up, I just realized I'd have to start the actual slideshow first. Start this loading screen. Hello there, DFC here. Today I'm going to be talking about a game that's near and dear to my blood-pumping organ located on the left side of my torso. This game has a lot of really interesting mechanics, is responsible for creating a large fandom, has multiple versions spanning multiple decades, and doesn't exist. This video game is called Sburb. In other universes, it's called Scrub. In other timelines, it's called Sburb. That's the same thing as the first one. In any case, it's a fictional game from the webcomic known as Homestuck. The game is highly adaptive, immersive, and highly personalized to the player's personalities. It's in essence a multiplayer, procedurally generated sandbox RPG with a high focus on the individual player's hero's journey and contains a highly flexible mythology that's tailored to the player's pasts. It has consistent guidelines for world building and mechanics while also being adaptive to the player's creativity. Its design focuses as much on how a player might fit into the world of the game as it does on how the world reacts to the player. Sburb is initiated by two players having a server-client connection. For the player acting as the server, they have access to and can manipulate the client player's physical house, similar to The Sims, but in real life. They can move furniture, expand the size of the building, and install things like stairs and balconies. The client, on the other hand, does not even need to touch their computer yet, as their game environment is the place where they live. The server places special devices into the client's home to progress the game, including one which, when opened, reveals an ominous timer. As it turns out, this timer is an indicator for how much time is left until the client's meteor is... kind of spoiled it. The client's home is destroyed by a meteor. The server and client need to work together as quickly as they can to get the client into the session proper, which exists in a physical location outside of the universe. To do this, they need to start with the Cruxtruder. The Cruxtruder, when opened, releases a single kernel sprite. The kernel sprite can be prototyped with an object, such as a stuffed animal, a living being, or even remains of the dead. And when that object comes in contact with the kernel sprite, that object and the kernel sprite will merge. The kernel sprite gaining the properties and behaviors of the object, and the object having knowledge of the game and other special abilities which it can use to aid the player. For now, it's just an angry ball that speaks
Did you put
gibberish.
grandma in the orb?
Yes. But we'll get to that. When the Cruxtruder's wheel is turned, it extrudes a Cruxite dowel. This is what will be used in Spurb's crafting system, known as alchemy. More on that later. The server player needs to add a few more doodads and do-mothers before the client succumbs to meteoric collision. One of the crucial elements is the pre-punched card. Each player's pre-punched card is unique, requiring the player to do something that vaguely has to do with the hero's quest that they will embark on later. After a few more gadgets are placed by the server, the client can start completing the entry sequence. The pre-punched card must be placed into the totem lathe. What does this contraption do? Well, it lathes totems. Keep up. You can also see the inventory screen that the player uses, which I may or may not get to depending on whether I can be bothered. Once a dowel is inserted into the totem lathe, it lathes the dowel into a totem. The totem produced from the pre-punched card must be brought to the alchemeter. This device scans the totem and produces the item. Since this is a special item for game entry, it costs no resources to create, and in this player's case, he receives an apple. His task is to eat the apple. Other players may have to break a bottle, wait for an egg to hatch, hit a piñata, etc. It may come off as arbitrary, but that's just how the spoiled apple crumbles under the weight of the tree, or whatever. Once the artifact is used, the client player and their entire residence are transported into the medium, free from meteor-related incidents. That's actually a lie, but we'll get to that when we get there. An entire planet is generated, and the new location of the residence is usually placed such that the rest of the planet is inaccessible until you enter the first gate. More on gates later. Their planet is named the Land of X and Y, where X and Y are placeholders for virtually any nouns. They could be wind and shade, light and rain, heat and clockwork, frost and frogs, little cubes and tea, pretty much whatever. As with many things in Sburb, the planets are designed to challenge or expand the player's core nature in some way, with the name describing the theme of the planet and sometimes its enemies or obstacles. Now that the initial client player is safe, the server player needs to enter the game before their house gets destroyed. Everyone who is going to play the game is going to have a meteor coming for their residence, and so do non-player characters, such as their neighbors. The problem of other minds aside, the initial server needs to find their own server, which could be their client, or it could be a third player, as in this recognizable symbol I downloaded from my waste management service. According to this sacred sign, the original client will eventually become the server for the final player. Or you could make it super complicated with 12 or even more players serving each other like it's Butler Island, and boy do they have a hankering for some tennis. That's a joke, like butlers serve, and then when you're the first to hit a tennis ball, it's called serving. Anyway, gates are portals above the residence, and there are 7 per planet. Here, let me get out a diagram for 4 players. By the end of these excruciating 2 minutes, you will fully understand this convoluted diagram and even recognize how extremely wrong it is. Let's focus on just a single player's path. That's better. So player 1 begins in the bottom left, building up from their home to the first gate. That gate sends them to their planets below, which is this sliver just to the right of the diagram. When they wander around the planet, doing quests with little salamanders and whatnot, and find their second gate, this leads them through their client player's second gate, and they need to build up to the third gate. This gate sends them down to their client's planet, and they do questy things until they find their fourth gate. The fourth gate sends them through their client's fourth gate, and they need to build up to the fifth gate. Gate 5 sends them to the planet below, and they quest until they reach the sixth gate, which sends them through their own sixth gate in the top left. Then they finally build up to their own 7th gate, and that leads them to the center of their planet, where they meet their denizen. What's a denizen? It's each player's individual boss. They are extremely powerful and surprisingly benevolent. They're involved with the player's individual quest. They're also a source of a huge amount of grist, which I'll discuss in like 10 fifth grader paragraphs. Before the game begins, the agents of Durst conspire with the denizens to befoul the planets with pollution and underlings. After that, they all go to sleep. A player has 2 options when it comes to encountering their denizen. They may challenge the denizen to battle, which will be extremely challenging, or they may accept the choice. Usually connected to mortality in some way, to an outsider, the choice appears to be a difficult decision. But to the player in question, it's not much of a choice. As with most things in the game, the choice is selected specifically for that player. One option will appear like the obvious option, while the other will appear like big stupid dum-dum. Jumping out a layer of abstraction for a minute, it may seem impossible to implement these sorts of player-specific choices or features without knowing the player beforehand. The strategy to use here as a game developer is to know them during hand. It could be straightforward, like starting off the game with a survey to get an idea of what things are important to them, or it could be subtle, tracking their in-game actions and using their minute decisions as a quiz of sorts. This would likely require the player to make specific decisions in a guided fashion, but it could also be the sort of thing where many possible decisions affect a multidimensional score, and the more questions they answer, the better you know them. There's also the idea of using AI in video games to make things that much more tailored to the individual player, allowing for a wider range of answers to affect gameplay. There's always a chance that the player could give nonsense responses like QWERTYUIOPASDF69420, followed by the meme of the month, and to that, the AI could simply respond with, "Oh, I see you're either trolling or speedrunning, so let me change things with that fact in mind." It's ultimately your choice whether you want to make things easier for such a player, or troll them back. I hope you're ready for some astronomy, because it's time to explain the Skyan system. Don't worry about the fact that that yellow planet is exploding. I couldn't find a non-exploding image. But then I did, but by then I had already closed out of my editing program and, well, here we are. Skya is like the sun, except it's also a planet. Before the game begins, the planet's surface, the battlefield, is locked in stalemate. Neither side can gain the upper hand. We'll see what comes of this battle later. Everything else orbits Skya. This is what a 4-player session might look like, and this is an 8-player session. At the center is Skya, and orbiting right next to it is the golden planet of Prospit, the Kingdom of Light. Outside of that are the players' planets. Also depicted in this image are the 7 gates of each planet. Farthest away is Durs, the Kingdom of Darkness. Between the planets and Durs, there is an asteroid belt called the Veil. It's a neutral ground between the forces of good and evil, and it'll have narrative importance that I'll explain later. The planet of Prospit orbits close to Skya. Its inhabitants, both the Carapacians and the players' dream selves, more on that later, are bathed in Skya's light, and the clouds tell of events past and future. Durs is far from Skya, with the Dursites and Durs Dreamers in relative darkness. Players who have Durs dream selves can commune with the horror terrors in the furthest ring, far from Skya. Sounds interesting, right? Excited to hear more? Well, too bad. I don't feel like explaining that in any further detail than I have in the last few sentences. I mean, come on, I already have so many notes to myself of what I need to talk about that it's looking less like a script and more like sheet music. Like, look at all these notes. Do, re, mi, fa, so, la, di, da. You'd better thank me for all this effort I'm putting in, or I will turn this car around and we can kiss Disney World goodbye. Don't think I'll do it? You think since I already paid hundreds of dollars that I won't make a U-turn on this highway? I'll make it so you won't even be able to enjoy Space Mountain in your dreams. And forget building a lightsaber or munching on a turkey leg or Mickey's face. The car will turn around so fast that the G's alone will make you regret your ungrateful attitude. Seriously, I put in all this work for you to sit there and dream of entering the Epcot ball while I'm trying to explain the intricacies of Spurb's game mechanics? I'm putting my foot down. On the gas. Because this was never about being appreciated, it was about analyzing this game top to bottom, past to future. I've decided that I don't care whether you thank me or kiss my ring finger, and believe me we will be discussing kissing later. But now is the time to stay on track. We're taking the fast pass straight to It's a Small World, because these planets in Sburb are much, much smaller than would be expected to maintain the gravitational field that they do. So onward and outward. We're making this happen, and you're going to like it so much that you'll be singing all the way back home. You ready? Let's continue. So, remember the Colonel sprite? Well, once prototyped, it gains this new ability called speaking in a slightly different flavor of absolute nonsense. However, upon entering the medium, the Colonel sprites separate into a sprite and a Colonel. The Colonel then splits into a black copy, which descends to Durs, and a white copy, which rises to Prospit. I'll wait a bit for the animation to catch up. Whatever object the Colonel was prototyped with is now transferred to the White and Black Kingdoms, meaning the royalty and minions now have the properties of that object. The battlefield evolves, with each player entering the medium contributing their first prototyping to the development of this battle. As for the sprite, it can still be prototyped once more, meaning the second object thrown into the sprite will merge with the first, but this will not affect the two kingdoms or enemies. Oops, there goes Nana's ashes into the sprite. One strategy with sprites is to prototype the sprite with a weak object, and then prototype it with something more helpful, like a loved one, or Lego Luke Skywalker from the 2012 X-Wing Starfighter set featuring the iconic T-65B X-Wing featured in the Battle of Yavin in Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope. Or something else, your choice. Should really stay on topic from now on. Inventory system. Inventory system. Inventory system. I don't know why these are fading in. Yeah, I'm not really going to explain it. Just know that when players pick up items, they go into a card called a CAPTCHA log card. CAPTCHA log, by the way, is a portmanteau of CAPTCHA and catalog. The reason for this name is that each card has a CAPTCHA code on the back. Some cards have essentially illegible codes. That or I'm just colorblind. Yeah, I'm not really sure why it's fading in. I might have copied the wrong slide. Just pretend that things are happening as instantaneously as I hope they do. With that knowledge bestowed upon you, we can explore alchemy. One of the apparatus that I skipped over is the Punch Designix. The player inserts the code on the back of the item's card, and the Design X punches holes in that card. This is essential for combining elements. There are two primary methods. You could take a card and punch it with the code from one item, and then punch that card again with the code of the second item. This is equivalent to the bitwise OR operation. You can also place two cards into the totem lathe together, resulting in only the holes the cards have in common being read. This is equivalent to the bitwise AND operation. Once players have advanced through the game somewhat and augmented their apparatus, they can theoretically make the crafting process a one-stop shop. Just insert the cards into the modified alchemeter, and Dave's your uncle. No, the cat is not part of the alchemeter. It's important to note that you can't craft just anything without resources. The crafting resource in this game is called grist. Grist can be obtained by defeating enemies or completing certain quests. And no, the pony is not grist. Taking a sharp right turn off Floridian Way, I have to talk about these two again. Now, players of the game actually have two selves. They have a waking self that lives on their planet of origin, such as Earth, or on the planets in the medium, but they also have a dream self that has always existed in the game session on the moons of Prospit or Durse, even before the waking self entered the game. This is in part because the medium is in a region known as paradox space, in which cause and effect are merely suggestions, and the flow of time in distant patches are completely disconnected from one another. In some sense, all sessions of the game that have ever happened or will ever happen take place simultaneously. Whenever a waking player falls asleep, their dream self awakens, and vice versa. Which moon they sleep on is dependent on their personality. When a player dies, their body ceases to move and goes limp. This is known in the game as being dead. However, there are two ways to stop being dead. One of the ways is to have someone smooch your corpse. Give your dead body a good snog. You know, locking lips with the deceased. Lean over that carcass and give it a peck. Tee up, swing, and get to first base with a dead guy. Swap spit with human remains. Actually, it could be alien remains. You know, this game can be played by any sufficient competent species. And as everyone knows, the multiversal standard for bringing a friend back to life is to canoodle a cadaver. Anyway, there is a second way to come back to life, and it also involves the dream self, but in a different way. The process is simple. Die. But you can't just die anywhere. It has to be on your quest bed, or a sacrificial slab that exists in the cores of the moons of Prospit and Durse. Something facing your own mortality for the greater cause or something. They say if you die in real life, your dream self becomes god tier. But if you don't have a dream self, then your waking self becomes god tier. Oh boy, here comes another one of those explanations. Basically, when you go god tier, you basically become conditionally immortal. If you die a just death, such as by being a terrible evil guy, you stay dead. You also stay dead if you die a heroic death, such as through self-sacrifice or dying in battle. I added you stay dead at the end of that sentence. I don't think that's grammatically correct. I could explain more, but this is the last paragraph I wrote before being tasked with presenting, so onward with what past me wrote. In essence, Sburb picks out planets with intelligent life that are able to compile the code for the game. Why is this a blank screen? There we go. As it also turns out, the players of each game session that reach a certain point in the game, with some caveats, were always predestined to play the game. You see, the game does not only destroy the home planet of the players with meteors, but in fact provides the players with their very existence through the beauty of slime. Paradox slime. In this image, we can see the forces of good and evil using ectobiology. What's ectobiology? It's essentially biology with time paradoxes involved. Here we see the chess pieces being used to produce the pawns for the light and dark sides. As far as the players are concerned, they are their own midwives. In short, they attempt to teleport their guardians into this meteor. But because that would produce a paradox, since the players already know that their guardians weren't teleported at that time, look, just roll with it, all that gets teleported is this paradox slime. The genetic material from each guardian is then sequenced, and out pops your mother, or father, or grandparent, or older sibling, or whatever. The point is that you may have a social relationship with them, and that's wonderful. But the fact of the matter is that biologically, these are your parents. Then comes everyone's favorite part of biology, the mixing of genes. Your parents' genetic material is combined, and then it's time. You're having a baby, and the baby is you. as well as your friend, who is actually your genetic sibling, and also your other fellow teammates whose birth you just attended to. The miracles of ectobiology never cease to inspire awe across the multiverse. Naturally, these newborn babies will be launched on meteors heading for their planet of origin. It just makes sense. Back to the main story, the game involves two mighty powers, the side of light and the side of darkness. The light aims to create, the dark to destroy. By the way, you can see here the effect of the sprite prototypings on the Queen's appearances. As with any good story, the light is always destined to lose. Wait, no, that's every bad story. Oh well, there's nothing the players can do to prevent this. It's a main plot point in the game that the White King should lose his scepter to the Black forces, and that the dark side should use the combined power of the White and Black scepters to initiate the Reckoning, a meteor storm that lasts 1 day. The players thus have 24 hours to defeat the Black King and Queen. If they don't defeat the Black forces, they fail. And if they fail, they lose. And if they lose, they don't win. And if they don't win, well, sucks to suck. During the Reckoning, the meteors in the Veil approach Skya. This is where the defense portals come into play. The ruins in which the code will later be found to actually run the game are in the meteors and fall into the portals. The ectobiologically created players and their guardians are also transported in this way. Along the host planet's timeline, portals briefly appear only to drop the meteors into the planet and then disappear. The meteors, of course, fall to the surface where they could be discovered in millions of years in the case of ruins, or just a few seconds in the case of carrying a baby who can't even read Catch-22 yet. Like, seriously, Joseph Heller put a lot of effort into the book, and all you're doing is babbling like a know-it nun and falling from outer space. Complete disgrace. As Heller says in famous novel, well, he died. You don't get much older than that. I'm sure someone will be able to connect that to something I've said here. Now that I've talked about 20th century literature, I can finally explain aspects. Every player has a title composed of a class and aspect. These aspects of subjective reality determine their special abilities throughout the game. Since I started writing this with less than an hour before the presentation, no fancy visuals, just imagine each aspect lighting up when I mention them. Something important to note about aspects is, I didn't actually finish that sentence. Something important to note about aspects is period. Oh well, starting with the 12 o'clock position and moving clockwise, we have breath, represented with the wind symbol. Breath symbolizes wind, freedom, and fantasies. Breath players focus on personal freedom. The life symbol looks like a plant and represents, well, life, as well as prosperity. Life players can interact with life, such as manipulating it, stealing it, or even bringing players back to life. The light symbol is a sun and represents knowledge and good fortune. The time symbol is a gear and represents order, sequence, and inevitability. I'm a time player, and while it can involve time travel, it doesn't have to. The heart symbol is a heart and represents emotions, consciousness, and soul. The rage symbol is whatever the heck that is, and represents anger, revolution, and chaos. The blood aspect represents lineage, relationships, and leadership. The doom aspect represents death, fate, and decay. The void aspect represents ambiguity, nothingness, possibility, and lack. The space aspect represents dimensions like distance, speed, and size, and the universe. The mind aspect represents intelligence, choices, and knowledge. Finally, the hope aspect represents determination and effort. These 12 aspects are the core components of the multiverse, but they overlap somewhat. Players have power over their particular aspect of the universe, and exactly how they interact with it is determined by their class. There are 12 known classes, or archetypes. Well, 14, but we won't talk about the other two because they're reserved for single-player sessions, and those would be way too complicated to explain right now. Classes are how one engages with their aspect, and the clothing that they receive, at least as it's portrayed in Homestuck, is what you see here. Going from left to right, the Thief and Rogue classes are classes that steal their aspect somehow. A Thief of Light could steal knowledge or luck from others for personal gain, while a Rogue of Void could steal from nothingness, or in other words summon something, for the benefit of others. The Witch and Sylph are classes that create or manipulate. A Sylph of Space could create space, like contributing to the creation of a new universe. A Witch of Time could, expand the lifetime of humans to indefinite measures, perhaps. I consider myself a witch of time, even though witches are usually associated with women. Maids and heirs and their relationships to their aspects aren't entirely known, but it could be anything from restoration to inheritance. A maid of life could restore life to others, while an heir of breath could inherit the qualities of breath and disappear into the wind. Princes and bards are destroyer classes. A prince of heart could splinter their own soul into multiple forms. A bard of rage could destroy using their rage. Mages and seers use their understanding of their aspects to guide other players. A seer of light could use their knowledge of the future to guide teammates to victory, while a mage of doom could use their connection of fate to help their team avoid defeat. Finally, knights and pages are servant classes. They help to preserve their aspect by providing in a session what might be lacking. A Knight of Time could use time travel to provide the team with additional time to complete quests, while a Page of Hope could inspire hope to their teammates, as well as hope things into existence. Using music as an analogy, you can think of each of the aspects as musical keys. Combined, they all complement each other, but they all perform different functions. A class is like an instrument. It determines how a particular key is expressed, whether it has a higher or lower register, what its timbre is. If this analogy was confusing to you, ignore it, and tell yourself I did a good job explaining everything. The point of this was to explain the hyper-flexible mythology that Sburb provides. It's intentionally vague so that it is applicable to players in as meaningful a way as possible, kind of like astrology. Now that classes and aspects have been thoroughly explained, I can finally explain aspects. Space players have an additional responsibility in each successful session, and that is absolutely essential to the team's success. They must breed frogs. Yes, the ultimate purpose of the game, involving Spurb's cruel and unthinking machinations that destroy entire civilizations, leaving code in ancient ruins for millions of years, causing the players that play the game to exist in the first place. The ultimate purpose of all that paradox and time shenanigans was to breed frogs. That's the path to the ultimate reward. Through ectobiology and selective breeding, they produce the Genesis tadpole. The importance of this infantile amphibian is not to be overstated. For once the towers on each planet are completely built, they can release all the grist they've collected into Skya, which acts as nutrients to mature the Genesis tadpole into the Genesis frog. Once the frog is ready, it will release the vast croak. Some of you science nerds might know this better as the Big Bang, and it marks the beginning of a new universe. Yes, the reward for all the players' hard work is to birth a new universe in which they can rule as gods, or participate in the developing societies, or do as they please. In the end, this universe might just find itself with a society which can compile the game anew and initiate again the life cycle of the universe. Now that I've talked about the ultimate purpose of the game, I can finally explain aspects. The time player has their own special task should things go horribly wrong. If the players cannot beat the Black King in time, or if their frog breeding duties come up empty, they have a second chance of sorts. Located on the planet of the time player, there is a structure known as the Scratch Construct. What this does is create an alternate timeline where the roles of the players and their guardians swap. Here, I found this nifty multiversal timeline from internet. The left side is the original timeline before the Scratch occurred. Since the green players, the bottom 4 babies, grew up to play the game and failed like a bunch of 13-year-old babies, the torch was passed onto a new instance of the universe, contained in the same Genesis frog. When the babies were sent into the Skyan defense portals, the game sent each asteroid into 2 distinct instances of the universe. Think of it like creating a branch in the timeline. Instead of the 4 bottom babies being children in the 2000s, they were cast to the past, as you can see in the red half. Their guardians, rather than preceding them, succeeded them as the 2000s children. Thus, they were alive to play the game instead of the original 4. Due to a little glitch in this particular case, 2 of the kids were thrown 4 centuries into the future, but don't worry about that. I'm sure it has no effect on the story whatsoever. And that's all I wrote.